Hello, welcome to Books and Brews,
the place where beer and literature meet.
With your host, certified Cicerone Michael Agnew.
And Laura Mosica, author of the Blue Bells Chronicles.
Each month we invite a guest author to read their words and talk about writing while sipping beers specially paired with their work.
Today's guest is Douglas VanDyke.
So sit back,
pop a cold one,
and dive into some books
and brews. And we can start our thing. We can start the thing. Let's start the thing.
Okay. Welcome back.
Welcome back to episode 10.
Yes, it is number 10 or number 20 if we count
all
everything.
Of the history,
right,
the entire
10
history.
/ 20. Yeah, how's your month been?
This has been a weird and stressful last couple of weeks just because of unexpected and expensive house repairs.
What happened?
I've got a disjointed drain pipe, which is going to mean having somebody come up and dig out the street and fix it.
That's like more than a house. That's everything. The city doesn't take care of that?
No, they only take care of it from their pipes.
From the street, okay.
So from your house to their pipe.
Wow. I had a friend
yours.
who had that just after he got out of the hospital from joint replacement.
Nice. So joint replacement to sewer replacement.
Look on the bright side. At least you don't have your joints having to be replaced at the same time.
Well, fortunately, I don't have to dig up my entire backyard because the break is under the street, so it'll be out in the street.
It could be worse.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I almost feel bad then telling you my month's been really good.
Lovely month.
It has been lovely. Yes, I went to the Chesterton Gala for the Chesterton Academy, and I was amazed by their students. They learned swing dancing.
Wow.
They are phenomenal artists because they take art for 4 years. I have booked 3 presentations of Scotland in the Eyes of the Author, so I am now on the lookout to start adding to my collection of armor and medieval weapons for this display. So
nice.
The dog comes with me, so it's a lot of fun. And I watched my son get a pin in wrestling against a very good team last night, so that was exciting. His first year wrestling. And he got accepted into college, so that's very exciting. One of my twins did. North Dakota State University. And he absolutely had his heart set on it. So
great. So he got the place he wanted to go.
It was the only school he applied to. He fell in love with the campus. And so that's a big moment for us. And just as if that's not enough, somebody gave me a French horn yesterday.
Wow.
Yeah. It was pretty amazing. So
I think a friend of mine still has my French horn from grade school through high school.
I forgot you played French horn.
I did,
Did you also play trumpet?
No, only French horn.
Only French horn.
Yeah.
It's a hard instrument.
And took guitar lessons for a very short period of time and then gave it up.
What's a short period, like a week?
No, maybe almost a year, but not, probably not quite a year.
Okay. Yeah.
I gave that same friend my guitar.
But now you took a banjo, right?
Yes, and that's going very well.
So I was thinking French horn is one of those bold instruments that goes off in the background. Like I'm not as musically inclined, so I don't think of it. But other times I hear people analyzing musical pieces, and there's something in the background which is just picking up the scene. Oftentimes I hear them, and there's a French horn going on.
It's a great instrument.
You know, you'd be surprised how many French horn players there are in the homebrewing community in the Twin Cities. It's remarkable.
Why do you think that is?
Because homebrewers are geeks.
Oh, I thought maybe trying to hit the right notes drove them all to drink.
No, who plays French horn but a geek?
So what's your reading? It's not something light this month.
No, not at all. So last episode I had just read The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin, and that got me hooked. So I just checked out James Baldwin collected essays from the library, and I'm working my way slowly through that. It is some dense reading and some impactful reading on the state of race relations, both in the 60s and, he died a while ago, but what he wrote is still very much relevant today.
So, well, I have kind of a funny story about that. We are actually booked, I believe, out through next August, and our guest in August will be Oscar K. Shaheen, who I believe our today's guest knows. In fact, I think we might have met at the same place, or we've been to some.
Yeah, we met at the Marscon 2 years ago, and he was there. Actually, I did meet him the year before because I went to Marscon before I was an author, and he had
I met him before that too.
Elaborate table setup that looks like he's got this huge board game going on.
It's a really neat setup. Well, anyway, my oldest son goes to some of these conventions and ran into this neat guy selling this, pair of pirate books. Started talking, said, my mom should go to these things, and started telling him, and Oscar said, hey, wait, I know your mom. So anyway, my son bought both of his books, which I'd been wanting to buy, and I started on Wrath of the Brotherhood by Oscar K. Shaheen, it's kind of a story of revenge. Have you read it, Doug?
Mm-hmm. Okay. I've got to read both. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I started on it, and then my son took it back. So I haven't finished it, but it's a story of revenge, at least as it starts. And you probably know the story better if you've read both books, obviously. But it's set in the 1600s, and it's very, very well researched from all I know from being on some panels with Oscar at various cons.
And one thing nice that he did with the second book, and if people see it, he still does a hardcover, puts a lot of detail on the inside of the covers, and the second book, he's got a lot of maps taken from historical maps that show some of the towns that the action's happening, so you can kind of get a really good visualization of what's going on.
Yeah, he's a really neat guy. I'm looking forward to doing his interview too. So
I wanted to tell you before we get going here. I was out shopping for beers for this episode, and was in the store looking in the coolers, and came across a beer that I had forgotten existed. From Three Floyds Brewing in Indiana. I don't have it.
Oh, it's not here.
No, it's not one of them I bought, but I just saw it from Three Floyds called Robert the Bruce.
Oh, because see, what I can see of this can, all I can see is something heart. And I keep thinking Braveheart. Hammerheart, okay. So
this third voice that you've been hearing is our guest for today, Douglas VanDyke.
Yeah, Douglas was born in 1971. He lived many different places while growing up, courtesy of the assignments of the U.S. Army offered to his father. I like the word offered.
Yes.
I actually got into discussion with that concept with someone online, which, is always a bad idea. Too quiet and too shy for too long, there were always dreams of other worlds and places, and the desire to write about them. He has played many tabletop RPGs as well as online MMOs, and you might want to define those for our listeners who might not know what that is. I'm sure I know everything, so not for me, of course. And many of his characters developed their personalities and quirks in these games before appearing in his novels. Douglas continues to write novels and think up short stories while pondering the changing literary world of print versus ebooks versus audio. He makes several appearances, presumably each year, at conventions around Minnesota. Douglas lives with his wife and 2 children challenged by autism. He works in healthcare, serving people's needs in imaging. When most people see him, he's wearing scrubs.
Yeah.
Today.
But I do have them handy in the car.
So I do know RPG is role-playing game. What is MMO?
So that's massively multiplayer online.
Okay.
And then there are role-playing games. So ones like EverQuest, World of Warcraft, and numerous others that I played with friends.
Okay.
That's nice too, because occasionally we'll have adventures then that are like so fun, so amazing. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to have to put something of that in a book someday.
That's actually how the book I co-wrote, 221 BC, started as a role-playing game. And the story kept evolving, so he started writing it. Yeah. So, what is our first beer?
So our first beer, to go with the first reading, is from Hammerheart Brewing. They are up in Lino Lakes, and the beer is called Stjørdal. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but something like that. STJO with the line through it,
right.
RDAL.
Stjørdal. That's
Stjørdal.
Approximately
that
close.
Sounds like a fantasy name I would come up with.
Yeah.
So when we read your next book and main characters are Stjørdal, we'll be like, oh, the beer guy.
So the Hammerheart Brewing, the brewer there is a Kentucky boy, but he discovered at some point in time Nordic ancestry and kind of became obsessed. And so all of the things that they do are Nordic inspired. And he actually went to Norway and studied brewing and worked with breweries there. And, so everything is very Nordic, Norse mythology kind of based. When I read this first reading that you're going to read in just a minute, it was, the images that came to me were like warrior culture, strong, rustic, almost Klingon-like.
I'd say many times they very are. Like, people know dwarves and how the clans are. And that idea of clan is very binding to them, more so, even than the individuals.
So I wanted something kind of reflective of that. Something rustic, something strong, something, that was something a warrior would drink going into battle or whatever. So this beer is an Alderwood smoked farmhouse ale, strong-ish at 8%. And I think it pretty adequately expresses the feelings that I was getting from reading this. So, cheers.
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 I would expect something darker for that sort of image you just described.
Not necessarily. I almost went with a mead, which would have been white yellow.
Yeah.
You would have been my favorite person ever had you given me mead.
And of course, people can't see the emblem on the beer there. It's got the stag head, but it looks like underneath it on the bottom here. I'm looking at this thing on the side. Yeah, that does look like a Norse, like a Thor's hammer hanging down there. So it's part of their emblem.
Yep. I will post the picture of the beers on the website, so you will be able to see the Nordic artwork that's on there. What do you think of this one?
I like it more than I typically like the lighter beers. And I'm not sure if that's because of the beer itself or if I'm just developing a taste.
It's not really a lighter beer. It's a light-colored beer.
Okay, fair enough.
Amber-colored.
Fair
Color
enough.
tells you nothing about
but
what a beer is going
remember,
to taste like.
I'm female and we shop for cars by color.
True.
So what do you expect?
All right.
No, I do
Nice,
like it.
kind of golden orange.
I'm expecting it won't be my favorite today.
No, it might be.
It might, we're not off to a good start then.
All right, go ahead.
All right. Well, I like that. A strong drink for a character who also has to kind of find her strength in this book. All right. So the first part I'm reading from is from the book The Widow Brigade, and short story. Our short teaser here is a dwarf widow leads a liberation movement in her patriarchal clan in order to get the rights to join the war against the humans that killed her husband. And so far, this has been a standalone. It's been the crowd favorite. Right. Dooley. He might have paused to swallow, although such an action would have been hidden under his bristly beard. I heard from the others. Stjørdal was killed in the ambush. Dooley's mind tumbled. As Sargus continued, she put up a wall to protect her feelings. You heard? Heard from who? The veteran paused at the interruption and glared with his good eye. People who were there. Then you didn't see a body. Dooley's tone became less respectful by the moment. Sargus had no reason to be dishonest with her, but she preferred to think he had erred rather than face the truth. Nandrin's hammer. He could be out there lost or something. We should go find him. Dooley worried about her husband being alive and needing their help in the wild. If Stjørdal had died, she would have felt it in her gut. In response to her outburst, the veteran showed offense at her insinuation of falsehood. Gunhand straightened to his full height, though his hunchback still made him shorter than the woman he faced. His voice came across as a respected male of the dwarven patriarchy, addressing an upstart, bottom-caste female. They brought the body with them. If you have any doubts, you can go up to the Stonebrow Vault and look for yourself. Stjørdal was a good friend of mine, and other friends of his were there to see him fall. His soul rests in Dorvanon. His tone set Dooley back on her heels. She wanted to denounce his words, but she could form none of her own. Dwarven women were used to hardships, and Dooley had made sacrifices of her own. She gave up her previous life to live with Stjørdal and his clan. Since then, he had made all her burdens seem trivial. If she accepted his death, the world would be an unbearable place. In the uneasy silence, her fists clenched with nervous energy. Gunhand wasted no more words with her. As master-at-arms of the clan, he was the one tasked with caring for their arsenal. All the guns were clan property first and foremost. She watched in mute frustration as he walked over to grab Stjørdal's musket. The gun displayed designs reflecting the dwarven beliefs. The flintlock hammer depicted Nandarin, god of fire, raising his smith's hammer to strike. Along the stock were 11 notches carved into the durable wood. Dooley had never given thought to the fact that they represented enemies Stjørdal had killed with the musket. He had faced Tyrikans in past skirmishes along a disputed border. Dooley refused to believe he was a notch for some boasting Tyrikan. Dooley could not bring herself to speak as Sargus snatched up the gun, powder barrel, and bag of lead shot. She wanted to admonish him for taking her husband's things. Her heart ached to snap at the dwarf and tell him that Stjørdal would be back to claim his belongings later. Sargus had no right to take her husband's gun and pass it on to some young fool. Even as he walked out, refusing any more eye contact, she could not bring her mouth to voice the words she wanted to say. Dooley stood there, brow furrowed, eyes glaring, fists clenched, unwilling to give in to despair. Despair was for those who lost their husbands. Dooley had no plans to become a widow. Her body remained so tense that she felt as if many of her muscles were pulled taut. She finally lost strength and dropped to a sitting position on the edge of the two-person bed. Dooley whispered to herself that it wasn't true. Her voice, pitched so low that little air actually came out from her moving lips, begged for Stjørdal to walk in the door. Another dwarf ran up to her doorway, daring to peek inside. Her closest friend, Glora Greencutter, was married to a cousin of Stjørdal. She had befriended Dooley from the first day the leather crafter arrived here from her home city. Glora's eyes sought Dooley's from within the reddish-brown hair and beard swept down to her beltline. Dooley turned her eyes upon this latest intruder. She didn't want anyone coming to her door unless it was her husband. "Oh, Dooley, I heard," Glora started to say before Dooley interrupted her. "You heard wrong!" Dooley spat with more anger than intended. Her tone caused Glora to shrink back into the hall a bit. "Stjørdal is fine. I'm cooking a meal for him. When he gets home, I'm going to give him a big kiss and show him how much I love him." Her voice cracked, betraying the pain building inside. Glora got past the frightful moment and stepped into the chamber. Dooley knew her friend wasn't about to leave her alone. Glora spoke regarding her own husband. "Tormro told me what happened. He helped bring the body down from the surface." Before she even finished, Dooley defiantly shook her head. "I'm telling you he is alive. He has fought Tyrikans before and beaten them. Humans are stupid, they can't catch Stjørdal." Glora sat down on the bed next to Dooley. The beardless dwarf looked away from her friend. Glora slowly managed to get her arms around Dooley, despite the adamant woman flinching from any such comfort. "I know he's alive," her voice cracked. "He'll be here any moment. I'll ask him if he saw any amazing new creatures on his journeys, like I always do." Glora held Dooley close as her green eyes began to water. There were no words in the dwarf language for crying or tears. Males got somber, while females suffered sorrows. Glora held her friend close, yet Dooley could see she turned her eyes away out of respect. It wasn't polite to witness a dwarf in the midst of sorrows. "We are just starting to plan on children." Dooley made every effort to make the words sound firm, even as her voice lacked strength. "I hope to talk to him into naming a boy after my father. You will still offer us that old cradle when it's time?" Dooley could not hold her faith any longer. She surrendered her denial while in her friend's comforting arms. The sorrows ran freely down her cheeks.
It's a very touching and sad scene. I don't read a lot of this genre, but as far as I know, we don't typically hear much about dwarves' emotions, do we? Or things like their marriages and planning families?
Right.
I mean, that's unusual, correct?
I think with all the fantasy stuff I read, that's one thing that's really big that's been missing too is, where are the dwarf women? Even in one of the Lord of the Rings movies, and when even Gimli is talking about it to Eowyn, he says, people think there are dwarf women, and Aragorn makes this motion. It's the beards. And yes, the dwarf women in my world do have beards.
Okay. Is that typical?
Yep.
Okay.
It's typical. It gives the main character, though, because I go into the history of it. There's a certain culture thing that because she comes into this clan from another one, and in an age long ago when there were wars between dwarves, women who were down the bottom of the caste anyways, were sometimes used as saboteurs. Mm-hmm. So an old cultural rule that still stands is her beard is removed. Okay. So that others can recognize that she's not originally from the clan. And that's a big thing with Sarah with her in this book, too. Okay, so she's a bit of an outcast in this clan anyway. Yeah.
Okay. And how much, as you write, are you bound by sort of, let's say, the canon of what dwarves are, the traditional views, what other writers have done, and how much do you feel free to branch out and make these dwarves whatever you want them to be?
Well, I was happy to give dwarves a lot of the main characteristics I say you see in a bunch of fantasy. Mm-hmm. They do have very strong clan culture, very patriarchal, since we only see the guys and only hear the guys venturing forth. But it seemed to me there was a lot of leeway to kind of show how they lived in this underground city, what the women did if the men were taking care of things like war and just about every macho thing you can think of. And yet Dooley's still having to, she's a leather crafter. Mm-hmm. And so she's still having to occasionally go to the surface, lay traps for animals and do that. But there's a lot of cases in this book where women might have a profession that's taught to them by their family. Mm-hmm. And if they lose that male influence, it puts them in a bad spot because people don't trust their work anymore.
Okay, without what is your background as a writer? Have you been doing it, for 10 years, for 30, for?
I remember even writing short stories when I was younger, when I was a teenager. Mm-hmm. And at the time, those were very action-filled. I mean, that's what also kind of held my interest at the time. Mm-hmm. And when I wrote my first book, around high school, coming out of high school, I spent a long time on it, and it was all written in pencil. I didn't have, didn't know typewriters, didn't know computers.
Like that, yeah.
But I got done with that, and I thought, okay, it feels like I wrote Rambo, so time to go out there and put something that I really do want to release out.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, how do you pronounce the fantasy world, Djørdal?
Oh, Djørdal.
Djørdal. Okay. And are all your books set within that world? Because we have totally different characters in these three readings. I know Boxer and His Wings isn't, but are most of your books in Djørdal?
Right, yeah. So far, aside from the Boxer book I'll read, all of them are currently set in Djørdal. I do get ideas for other worlds, other things. I haven't really developed them as much. Mm-hmm. But mostly, I've been focusing on this world, and now I've got my 8th book coming out. So people see all these books at a convention and they're like, where do I start? And I give them a few points. These are usually where people first get into it. Mm-hmm. And it's a world that follows the same theme, but different characters, different stories. And I tell them, sometimes I will mix it up. You'll see a character make an appearance in another trilogy. And
cameo. What sparked the idea for the Widow Brigade?
See, when I go back, and I'm trying to remember it, I think I was getting first a feel for it because, as we talked earlier about MMOs, now this whole world, Djørdal, was an RPG world before I started writing in it. And I remember actually when, this is a fluke, when World of Warcraft came out, and normally I'll play this male ranger hunter. Well, they didn't have those. They had if you wanted to be a hunter, you had to be like a dwarf or something. Mm-hmm. So I decided to go completely away from my comfort zone and made a female dwarf hunter, and that was Dooley. Mm-hmm. And as I went into the dwarf culture, somehow during the game, I just started getting these stories, the story into my mind, and it's like, where are the dwarves? Where are, there was so much out there, games and books that also didn't take in mind the women that I meet role playing and gaming. Mm-hmm. It's like there's nothing out there for them. So it was important to me to have a book with strong female presence and go maybe deeper into that dwarven structure than like anyone else has given a view of.
So, and that raises a really interesting question. Like for me, I'm kind of doing the opposite. I've spent 10 years writing Sean, the obnoxious womanizing musician, who I really hope is nothing like me. I don't think I'm a womanizer. And Neil, who's a medieval warrior. How do you get into the mind of a female and of a dwarf, but particularly of a female?
Oh, I've had fans actually ask me that too. It's kind of like a thing that was like, how'd the story come from you?
And yet writers do it all the time.
Yeah. I did try to take some traits I've seen, even my wife and others, but a mix of good and bad. Mm-hmm. I see especially in this case, I knew there was kind of a silent suffering. We've seen it in our history that women endure this. Sometimes women have been second-class citizens, struggles for the right to vote. And this is a liberation movement basically in this dwarf culture too. So I would look at that. Dooley is very emotional, which I know runs kind of anti what we see out of most dwarves. In fact, there's many cases where she's still having to try to lock the emotions down, portray it. But
I think that's very realistic, though, to what people expect of a dwarf. Mm-hmm. So I think we are ready for beer number 2.
All right. Mm-hmm. So for beer number 2, with this next reading, I took most of the influence for the pairing from the very first paragraph, where you kind of describe the setting. And what you've described is a very pastoral setting. You talk about it being planting season and the forests, and I'm imagining sort of rolling farm fields and people working out in the fields, and long ago in the real world, water was not so safe to drink. Beer, however, was, because part of the brewing process is boiling, so it would kill anything harmful, pathogenic in the water. So farmers would brew, actually farm wives specifically, would brew a low alcohol beer that was intended to drink through the summer to stay hydrated, to hydrate farm workers. And that beer has evolved into a style. I mean, back in the day, it would have been made with whatever was on hand. You had a lot of oats, you made it with oats, whatever. It's evolved into a style that is identifiable and recognizable called Saison, which means season. This is Saison Dupont, which is sort of the benchmark beer for the Saison style, and one of my favorite beers in the world.
Wow.
So,
cheers. Good excuse to get it then. Uh-huh. Cheers.
So it's very light, refreshing, kind of orangey, citrusy flavors, and lots of pepper. Pepper comes from the fermentation, from the yeast.
You might have been wrong. I think I do like this a little bit better than the other one.
Okay.
I think so. I think the other one had a bit more of, bite, tang,
smoke,
bitterness
definitely.
To it. Is that what you
that
call
too,
it?
yeah. So I was just thinking too, this is slightly lighter, thinner going down.
Yes, it is. Definitely.
I mean, it's alcohol-wise not that much lighter. It is 6.5%, so it's only 1.5% lower alcohol than the other one. But
so what,
it drinks very, very light.
Yeah.
What would be the average alcohol content
of this style beer?
Well, of any beer. What would be sort of the range?
I would say
about
4 to 6.
4 to 6. Okay, I know we had a discussion at what was the place we recorded last Jörg, of course. We had a discussion about that, about how people don't want a beer with the alcohol content too low. which I would think you drink it for the taste, but that's just me.
This is the United States of America.
Right.
Beer.
Got to get hammered.
Used to be, or like regular beers are an alcohol delivery system.
Yeah.
It used to be a big thing back in those 1920s with Prohibition and that, when they
I thought you were
limited what you could.
1980s in college. Way back when. So this is Inheritance of a Sword and a Faith, which is a completely separate book, or is it a short story?
Oh, yeah, Inheritance of a Sword and a Path. So this is a separate book. It's the start of a trilogy. I still made it as a standalone, so that, some reasons they didn't feel like they were actually compelled, like they were buying a whole trilogy right away. So it does have a story that begins and ends, and when people dive into the other two, then they're getting deeper into the plot.
Okay. Go ahead.
All right. And this one is the first one that I actually did release. Basically, the short part of it is two young men enlist adventurers to rescue a noble girl, unaware of the greater plot set into motion by ambitious gods. So this does introduce readers to this world has a bit of a cold war between the gods.
Okay. And this is not set in De Laurel, or is it?
Yep, this is in De Laurel.
Okay.
In fact, I'd say this series is the most at the core of De Laurel, because especially if you dive into books 2 and 3, you see this cold war between the gods and how it's really in the background of everything else. On the 24th day of Florum, the planting season was old enough to see the green forest alive and mostly recovered from the winter season. Common folk across the continent of Quaros pursued their interest in fishing, agriculture, brewing, needlework, or simply enjoyed a lazy day. Lifestyles had improved from the dark years old ones spoke of during evening fireside chats. Elders still lectured of days when farms suffered, caravans between lands faced frequent ambush, and many a winter night passed with scarce food. Life seemed so calm and serene in most small villages, a far cry from the tales of war in other parts of the realms. One might expect to find a young man collecting firewood, going about his farm chores, or collecting wildflowers for the maiden of choice. The day sparkled with the promise of sunshine, and the soft wind brought forth the fragrance of the early flowers. Outside one of these many small hamlets, morning sunlight filtered through a cover of leaves into the waiting ferns and plants below. A place of serene beauty existed in those woods, blessed by a goddess. Stones and wood planks made up a tiered garden, no more than 10 feet each side, as part of a humble shrine. A young man stood nearby, his worship interrupted. While others enjoyed the weather and calm tidings that the morning brought, this man found peaceful thoughts far from his mind. "You dare interrupt my prayers and defile this place of worship. Have you nae respect, nae good conscience to guide your blades? Worldly treasures will not save your souls in the next life." The young man stood defiant, blade in hands and legs spread slightly. He held his sword in a two-handed grip that allowed strength and control. 3 silent attackers would test him this day. The young man looked back angrily on their impassive visages, fire staring down ice. The odds weren't good, but he steadied his resolve. He determined to fight bravely for his ideals and hoped to survive the battle with more than his morals intact. Like a coiled spring ready to pounce, his legs stood ready and balanced. His brown eyes measured his foes to determine where the first threat would come. They issued forth no explanation for their aggression, yet made their intent clear through bared blades. The young man decided it was time to force a move, then pray for the best. He picked the enemy most eager, one with a sword cocked back for a swing, and intentionally turned part of his back towards the attacker. In doing so, he seemed to be diverting his attention and left an opening for the impetuous one to attack. The attacker fell for the bait, seeing an opportunity to strike. Expecting the attack, the young man spun off to the side and parried the sword strike. He caught and pushed the attacker's sword away. The young man continued the motion, keeping the arc constant as he used both hands on the hilt to try a swing of his own. The opponent's shield blocked the counter-strike. The easy feint and strike had missed, and now the young man worked his sword fast as the action exploded around him. The other 2 opponents advanced and attempted to once again surround him in their circle of blades. Right and left the young men parried the swords coming at him. With no shield at hand, his sword served both offense and defense. Not relying solely on strength alone, he controlled the momentum of his sword with the counterbalances of both wrists and forearms. What it lacked in hitting power it made up for in speed and control. His spinning blade circles deterred any opening, while his feet kept moving to avoid getting encircled. In the initial lunges from his attackers, none of their blades could penetrate past the blocking sword. There was little enough room to maneuver between the garden shrine and the surrounding trees. One attacker, shafts of sunlight outlining his tall frame, brushed against the young man. Aware of the trap closing, the lone defender reversed his direction of travel. He swung his sword up while he ducked low to run his body between the middle of his opponents. Spinning his blade as he went, he blocked a couple attacks but also sliced at the side of one aggressor. The young man felt the blade skim along an opponent's torso. Slipping behind them, he continued another swing from the reverse direction to strike the same foe. The two hits from his sword struck hard and drew wounds, but were mostly absorbed by the attacker's armor. The young man paid for the move, feeling a sword slide along his side as well. Too occupied to worry about any wound, he pushed the attack against the two remaining opponents before they could reorganize. The third stumbled a bit apart after getting wounded. The defender's temporary gain failed to bring any break in the fighting. Left and right and spinning from side to side, he blocked two enemy swords as they pressed at him again. The sounds of clashing weapons mixed with hard breathing, while dust kicked up to obscure parts of the wood. Bad chance struck. As the young man moved around to one side, his foot caught a root. He fell down to his knees. The sword came loose from his hands and tumbled a few feet away. Trying to quickly dive for it, he felt the sword tip scratch into his back as he moved. There he lay after the strike, sword still out of reach, but two opponents standing above him quietly. "Cursed tree root! If this had been in the open, I would have fared much better. As it is, I swear I bravely outfought you three," Treston declared from the dirt. The young man slowly regained his feet, for the most part unhindered. One offending tree limb, which played the part of a sword in his imagination, brushed him as he stood, a reminder he had lost this one. He staggered past his unmoving attackers to retrieve the short wooden pole which served as his practice sword. Turning back, he once again looked over his three opponents. They mutely stood, soaking in the sun's light and the soil's nutrients, unmoving as the trees they had always been. Those three formed a nice triangle, and with low branches serving as swords or shields to the youth's imagination. He worked to catch his breath even as he relaxed in the cool morning air. The small glade remained a peaceful place, where a young man could simply imagine himself as a legendary knight from myth. Treston tucked the practice stick into the simple rope belt that held up his trousers. He inspected himself where one branch had brushed him, and was glad to see it hadn't torn his garb prior to the day's work. He had few enough tunics and couldn't afford to tear them. He had a handsome, compassionate face, with dark hair atop his head. His mustache could be called a thick collection of whiskers, though the rest was clean-shaven. Treston was muscular and solidly built, thanks to hard work at his father's smithy. The young man kept energetic, and friends knew he was quick to smile. The rest of his appearance caused some to overlook those good traits. There was little he could do about the black, sooty areas on his hands, face, and garb. He washed often, but a hot day at the forge replaced everything he tried to clean off. Patches covered the loose-fitting tunic and trousers. He only had 3 tunics to his name: the festival one, the work one, and the evening one. A length of old rope was the only belt he ever needed. His shoes were black and soot-covered, each sporting a hole or two in them. A wooden stick served as a practice sword. Treston's only weapon was a quarterstaff, the weapon of choice to most peasants, as it was all they could afford. Simple and humble, he went about many days dreaming of other worlds and other places he could be, if only he had the chance.
Very nice. I enjoy your use of voices when you're reading. I think a lot of our guests have been poets, different sorts of readings. Like last month, Martin Case, there would not have been the opportunity to
do voices.
Do voices, yeah. So that's fun to listen to. Tell us a little bit about your process of world building. Where do you start to create an entire new world?
Yeah, because the worlds that you create are actually the inspiration for all three pairings today.
Yeah, so Dale Rall, like I said, started as a gaming world, and I put a lot of thought into it because even as I played RPGs, Dungeons & Dragons, there were things about the setting that bothered me about traditional fantasy. One of them was, you can have this world with all these gods, why don't they interfere all the time, like the old classic Clash of the Titans movies when Zeus picks Perseus up? And why are there all these ruins? And people brought up, too, weapons and armor went along a certain course in history. How do you change that up for fantasy? And so what was appropriate was to have this actually war between the gods that did happen a millennia ago, because they did interfere, and they wrecked the place. And the continents, even as I designed them, were all shattered. There used to be larger now. Now a continent in my world is very small. It could be like Great Britain.
Okay.
And that led to other things. It gave a good reason why people are suddenly having to re-explore the map, rediscover all these ruins, and why there's actually powerful magic weapons from this old war that are still lying hidden, waiting to be found, and misused, as in the case actually in this trilogy.
What is the appeal of creating a whole new world instead of writing from the world we live in? What can you do that you couldn't do with our world?
I tell you, I think the stories just came more easily to me. And even though...
Because you're not limited by what is?
Yeah, I just love the chance at building something totally new and throwing my imagination into it. And even though it is a world that I put magic, I still try to rein myself in that the story's got to be about the characters. That's where I start every project. It's got to be the characters. The magic is still just the back setting.
We are on to beer number 3.
All right. So with this next reading, we shift gears entirely out of the fantasy realm.
Right, this is not Dale or Allen anymore. Right?
And so the beer shifts entirely as well. So with this, again, it was the world building that you do, the environments that you set that inspired all three of my pairings today. And this one, the environment you set is kind of Prohibition era. It's probably later than that, but in my imagination, it was kind of Prohibition era. You've got some tough, unsavory characters, smoky rooms, I'm imagining, gangsters, boxers, all this kind of a world. And so I wanted first a historical throwback beer. So this is Budweiser Copper Lager. So Budweiser at that point in time was already one of the biggest breweries in the country, if not the biggest. So people would have been drinking Anheuser-Busch beers, and Budweiser in particular. The Copper Lager is a standard style that would have been made back then. But this one, I also wanted something that suggested like bootleggers and whatnot. So this one is aged on Jim Beam barrel staves. So you get a little bit of that bourbon flavor in there as well to give you the Prohibition bootlegger feel.
Cheers. Or slancha. We should mix it up a little bit.
This is the darker one, too. You say that copper color, I'd say, yeah.
You got it completely wrong. I like this one.
Actually, after I said that, I thought you might actually like this one.
No, they've been getting better and better. Just
one, you like the malt. Two, you like the bourbon. You tend to like the whiskey barrel aged beers.
Surprise!
Did you know you were a whiskey drinker?
Actually, I would typically say no, but there's a whiskey in Scotland called Glava that I would almost go back to Scotland just to drink Glava.
So good.
I think I'd have a hard time between this one and the other one. Although, when you like the whiskey and the bourbon, I expect almost like even a harder kick, and it doesn't kick like that.
It's very nice. Yeah. So this is Boxer Earns His Wings.
Yep. So this one, I did this one as a steampunk throwback to the 1930s action serials that inspired Indiana Jones. This one, Boxer takes his revolver and brass knuckles into the most advanced biplane of his time to stop a mad scientist train. So, very alternate Earth, and yes, timelines are slightly mixed up here with the technology. I'm staring past my raised fists and bloody knuckles at what might as well be my own reflection. A muscular brawler, similarly stripped to the waist, covered in sweat, taking turns spitting gobs of blood. He's even got my dance steps, the only kind I know how to do. It's a dance in which we circle the square ring until one of us ends up kissing the mat for 10 seconds. I can see the blood on his knuckles past the loose skin flips covering my own. No gloves to soften this man's game. We have only a few supportive bandages from the fingers down to the wrists for when the fist tenderizes the meat. So far, the blood and bruises we've donated have just been us testing each other. Mere foreplay for those witnesses cheering and jeering. In the darkness surrounding us are a few invested wallets hiding behind loud mouths. Some come in leaving a sod trail, sporting revolvers, and wearing their cowboy hats and spurs. Other rowdies let loose after spending their strenuous days swinging big sledges to connect the railroad across the continent. Most of those strongbacks barely have money to spare for gambling, but they laid down the track that brought the rest of the coins here. The most dangerous men in the audience possess neither weapons nor strong arms. They wear tailored suits, the rich fabric boasting of backroom deals over thick cigars and deep pockets for buying anyone and anything in here. Their cologne does little to disguise the tobacco smell. Regardless of scented or sweaty, full pockets or moth-ridden, the room full of folks sits on the same beer-stained benches as their stomping feet crunch spilled peanuts. Most of the crowd shout a din of instructions. Of course, we ignore them. We're the two alpha males sharing the spotlight. I haven't got a care for any distraction from amateurs who won't ante up their own bodies for the ring. A door opens, and a shaft of light interrupts the tobacco-fogged darkness. Two more fine tailored suits walk into the room. They swagger in with the confidence instilled by their hidden badges, but I know they wear them. Those polished stars are likely pinned next to concealed government-issue sidearms. These particular suits always bring me trouble. True to our past interactions, things go south right away. My distraction nearly costs me a tooth as a well-timed hook sneaks by and spins me at the cheek. I'm stumbling backward, trying to reorient my head. I throw out a jab just in case it gets lucky or slows him. Before I'm properly set, I feel my right arm touch the rope. I really don't like getting backed into the rope. We trade a flurry of blows so close we're almost hugging. Finally, I give him a shove that backs him up and gives me time for a breath. The old routine returns. Dancing, sweating, spitting. I cast a glance over to my ringside friend Jerry. In between taking bets and counting money, he gives me the sign. Apparently, my recent setback against the ropes served some good purpose. It seems enough people still haven't heard about me, so they start betting their money to the other guy. They don't know they are giving in to a sure loss. Normally, this is where I begin wearing the other guy down and slowly put him away. Between Jerry and me, we'll take in a nice haul. Unfortunately, my hot temper is boiling over at the appearance of the suits and what they represent. Getting backed against the ropes didn't help my mood either. This guy is about to find out why everywhere I go, everyone calls me Boxer, as if I was the only one. My jab convinces him to raise his arms higher for a moment. He's distracted as my right uppercut to his abdomen lifts him off the mat. As he drops, his torso and arms plunge too low. A left hook drops the rest of his defenses. My right cross slams his head backward until it bounces off the canvas. The yelling and cursing in the crowd hits a new high. The referee starts counting, but I know there's no need. Even Jerry is looking up at me, stunned that I pummeled the guy so quickly. I wasn't showing off for the loud crowd of wallets. My show was aimed at the two badges who will be cornering me when I'm done. When I'm long. The proprietor of the place gave me a nice room with a clawfoot tub for cleaning up, as I'd requested earlier in the day. Normally I like to get clean after a fight, put on an enticing musk scent from a bottle, and dress up fine as those suits who interrupted the fight. It's not that I prefer fancy clothes. They're more like a costume to me. I guess it's my own little joke to fight dirty and dress dandy. I'm a fan of sarcasm. Not today. Since I know those government lackeys will be turning up any time, I change my routine. I start shadow boxing, push-ups, arm curls, anything to work up even more of a sweat. A bar supporting a divider curtain hangs near the tub, useful for pull-ups. Shirtless, my chest and back display every knife wound, burn scar, and puckered shrapnel entry I've ever earned. On a good note, the doctor's fees for most of those injuries weren't mine to worry about. They just added to the bill for those who kept wrangling me into shit jobs. To add to the intimidation, I even leave my personalized brass knuckles lying nearby, just to complete the image. The only thing not displayed is my 6-shooter, since it's often a good idea to keep a hidden ace.
I really like this one. Now, I like Julie a lot as a character, and I'd like to read more about her. But as far as plot, this one really, I was like, no, don't stop the reading there. What's going to happen? So,
I'll add in as a fun one, this was supposed to be a compilation project with some other authors, and they picked steampunk, which I'd never done. So this was my attempt at doing that genre.
That was on my list of questions. Why steampunk? Can you define exactly what steampunk is? It's the cross of sort of Victorian culture with...
It does seem to be defining itself even to this day, because there's various levels of it. But yes, a Victorian culture and dress... you see in the way of, like, some people will take it out of even vampire stories and that, but sometimes it mixes in with some kind of technology that is a little ahead of its time. Steam, most often used, but sometimes people sneak in other sources, like some kind of magic or an alien technology or something like that.
So it's a bit of a, it's sort of like the Renaissance Festival has almost everything other than Renaissance. It's medieval, it's fantasy, it's Star Trek, like they're Klingons walking around the Renfest.
I typically, though, think of it as Victorian culture with anachronistic technology.
But more advanced. So, that would be... this first scene is all about boxing, and I've mentioned we have Oscar coming up in August. We also have Mark Connor coming up, and he is a professional boxer and poet, which is perhaps a combination you don't often see. But he's a professional boxer. He does it for a living. He teaches. What got you interested in boxing, and what is your experience with boxing?
Done some with my brother when we got some boxing gloves for Christmas. We gave ourselves a headache that first time.
Having 7 boys, I was about to ask, was this like deliberate or was this just Christmas morning?
We boxed till we had headaches, and I actually took part of that scene in one of my and put it in one of my other books, The Earth and Stones, which I read. But but this guy, as I say, many of my characters have developed some kind of personality from RPGs. And this was also from a steampunk-styled RPG that I was invited to for one summer. Okay. And coming up with the guy, in that series, he was a bit closer to 1930s. I was thinking like a guy who would be zoot suit, tough guy. And that was also just one of the very popular still sports, from whether you go from the Wild West to the 1920s as boxers. I mean, that was like real man's game and such. So... That macho-ness is, I think, what carried over why I decided that for this guy.
Did you do a lot of research in boxing itself?
I did do a lot of reading as far as the moves, the types of punches and that, which still comes down to 4 basic ones, which I lined up at the end of that fight right there. You know, boxer manages to hit the other guy with all 4 basic punches.
Okay. So. I wanted to back up because we ran out of time in the other segment. Okay. What I found interesting is it seems to me a lot of our guests have grown up in the military or have done a lot of moving around. And do you think that has affected you as a writer? Is it something that kind of creates in us the need to write?
I think it could. There are elements there with moving all the time. It's hard to have any long-term friends. I mean, the longest,
tell me about it.
I usually have a friend for 2 years, and I'm making friends all over.
Again. Yeah.
So there's a certain... I admit loneliness, seclusion there, which might have gone into more of the books. But there's also seeing sights, traveling places, seeing different things.
It fills your head with a lot of things that other people don't necessarily see.
Yeah.
Right, and I've thought that with my own writing, that my very first memories up until I was almost 6 were in Germany. So I grew up seeing medieval castles and going into salt mines and, all these kind of unique experiences.
Yeah. And I did live in Germany for 3 years, too.
Did you? When... in the Army?
It was between when that was in the Army. It was between 1977 to the very end of 1979.
You got there a few years after I left. What part were you in?
Yeah, we were around Stuttgart.
That's where I was.
So,
yeah, Stuttgart.
And I know we saw some salt mines, the Black Forest, Birch's Gardens. We took a trip there. And
I know
windmills.
we were there. Yeah. One of my favorite stories from that is there used to be a pig fest. Did you ever go to the Schweinfest?
Sounds familiar, but I don't think I ever went to it. Yeah.
How old were you when you lived there? You must have been
I was
7 or 8.
young, so I was between 6 and 9.
Okay, so you were just a little older because I left just before my 6th birthday. Mm-hmm. Well, my parents took us to the Schweinfest, and the story behind this, I'm laughing because you believe what you're told as a kid. The story behind it is that once upon a time, there was an invading army coming, and so they shoved a carrot through the latches of the gate, and the pig came along and ate the carrot and let in the hordes. And so every year they have a pig fest and roast the pig and eat it in retaliation. And one day, I will not admit to how old I was thinking about this, and I went, wait a second. Nobody's stupid enough to lock the gate with a carrot. So, I think you come across some interesting stories when you live in a place that's that old. And,
I miss the Volksmarches, the scenic towns you walk. Every building has character over there and such.
And the ambulances. I remember always we would imitate them going, neener, neener, neener.
Did that too?
They had a very distinctive sound. So
I'll say for Michael, that was some of my first German there too, was when my dad would take me off base to a bar, and I'd be like, ein Bier, ein Cola.
Yeah.
So you learned your German well.
Yeah.
Do you plan to continue with Boxer?
Yes, I've got some other ideas percolating in my head, so I don't know when I'll turn to them, but I plan on doing some other, and they won't necessarily be chronological order either.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so just a series, kind of like the Hardy Boys. Mm-hmm. Okay, so eventually there will be like 500 books and he's 35 the entire time or 25 or whatever.
Yeah, I'll get more adventures.
Yeah.
I'm certain the next one's going to be around like kind of an old steamboat casino.
Mm-hmm. I've never read much Steampunk, but I think you've sold me on it. I'm excited to find out what happens to him. So it is time to wrap up. And Doug, can you tell our 4.3 million listeners where they can find you?
Okay. So the website is dealoral.com.
And spell that out.
And that's DheaLoral. And I've got my books on Amazon, Kindle. Around the Twin Cities here, I've got books on the shelf over at Chapter 2 Books in Hudson. And I'm working with a few others, like we just had an appearance at the AZ Gallery in St. Paul, so hopefully there too. Mm-hmm.
And you have a Facebook and Twitter, right?
Yep. Facebook, you can also find me with the same thing, dealoral. And Twitter, I'll have to spell this one, Thamin, at Thamin dealoral. So at ThaminDhealoral.
Okay. And Michael, where can we find you?
I am at aperfectpint.net. And A Perfect Pint on anything else.
Anything else? Yeah.
We are at booksandbrews.net and on Instagram as bookbrews.
Book, singular, the letter N, brews, plural.
Yes.
I think, is that a good balance? One book and many brews?
Yes, I think it's a very good balance because, it's going to take you a while to get through the book.
Doesn't it depend how long the book is?
Yeah.
Okay. I am you can find me either bluebellschronicles.com. I have to think about all my URLs. There are several that point to the same site. LauraVosica.com, I believe, will get you there, VOSIKA. And I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook as laura.vosica.author. Twitter just at Laura Vosica, all one word. And upcoming events, do you have any?
Yep. The next 2 events I'm going to be at in the Twin Cities are Con of the North, which is happening Valentine's Day weekend over in the west side of the city. It's like a Crowne Plaza Minneapolis West. And Marscon, again, that's going to be at the long Leap Day weekend, February 28th, 29th.
Yes, 29th, yeah.
So that's Marscon. For those events, I have a new book coming out called Apprentice Storm Age, which is a set in De La Rue, which is also set younger for readers, maybe teens or something than some of my others. And because that one's coming out too, I'm going to work at a few book appearances, but that's, I'll have to put it on my website.
You have a lot of energy. I've run out in the last couple of years. Do you have any upcoming events?
No public events, as always.
Okay. Well, I have. I'm not actually sure. I think these are public events. They're far in the future, but I have these 3 presentations of Scotland in the Eyes of the Author coming up at Club Prior and at what's called Gladstone Building in Oakdale, but those are in May and July. And if you would like the presentation at your own location, give me a call. And
I just want to point out before we sign off here that I hit with all 3 beers.
You hit.
With you.
Yes, you like
all
more or
3
less
beers.
did.
And
I didn't hate any of them.
During that last reading, Laura grabbed the bottle of Budweiser
Oh
beer
no!
water.
Oh no! I thought I could get
poured all of it into her
'cause it's
glass.
not on video. He's lying. He's lying.
All right, go ahead.
It's
Who's
all
coming
dirty
next?
lie.
Who's in our next episode?
Let me see. Tim Young, who is a poet who has worked with Robert Bly, will be talking with us next month. So
Great.
I'm excited to talk to you.
Thank you, Douglas, for coming in and chatting with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
All for tuning in to episode 10.
4.4 million of you, which is 20. We must be doing well.
We must be.
We must be very entertaining.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.